The email arrived at 11:17 p.m. with a subject line that was just my name. It was from my mother. The body of the message was 6 words long. You have broken this family's heart. I read it, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I felt a strange, chilling sense of calm, like a fever that had finally broken. I closed the email, opened a new document, and typed the title of the manuscript I had just finished. My own title. Then I attached it to a new email and sent it to a literary agent my mother had never heard of. 2 days later, my sister Amelia's publisher sent her a notice of contract suspension. By the end of the week, my mother's charity foundation had its primary benefactor, a shell corporation I secretly controlled, dissolved without warning. My sister's first panicked text message was simple. "What did you do to me?" I just stared at my phone and smiled. She should have asked, what did I finally do for myself? It all started, as these things so often do, with a lie we all agreed to live by. My sister, Amelia, is Amelia Hawthorne, the novelist. You've probably seen her face on the cover of magazines, her name on bestseller lists. She's described as a once-in-a-generation voice, celebrated for her haunting prose and deeply emotional characters. She gives these beautiful, thoughtful interviews where she talks about her process, how the stories just pour out of her. The truth is, Amelia hasn't written a word of fiction since she was 19 years old. I know this for a fact, because I'm the one who writes the books. All of them. Our arrangement, as my mother Eleanor likes to call it, began in college. I was the quiet one, the bookworm, who lived in the library and filled notebooks with stories. Amelia was the star, charismatic, beautiful, socially brilliant. She was the one everyone noticed. I wrote a short story for a university competition, a deeply personal piece about our grandmother's final days. I was too shy to even submit it. Amelia found it, loved it, and asked if she could read it at a campus arts festival. She didn't say she wrote it, but she didn't say she didn't, either. She won. The applause was thunderous, the praise intoxicating. My mother was there, and I saw the look in her eyes. It wasn't pride in Amelia. It was the look of a CEO identifying a market opportunity. That night, she sat us both down in the living room of our old New England home. She laid it all out with the chilling pragmatism of a corporate strategist. "Clara, you have the talent," she said, her voice smooth and reasonable. "Amelia, you have the presence. Separately, you are 2 bright girls. Together, you can build an empire, a legacy." She made it sound like a noble sacrifice, a family project. Amelia would be the face, the brand. I would be the engine, the ghost. My name would be on nothing. In return, I would be taken care of. I wouldn't have to worry about money or bills or the messy business of life. I would be free to just create. For them. I was 20. I was insecure. I loved my sister, and I wanted my mother's approval more than anything. So I said yes. For 15 years, that was my life. I lived in a small, quiet cottage on the back of our family's property, while Amelia lived in a stunning Manhattan penthouse. I wrote. She thrived. The resentment wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow rising tide. It was watching Amelia on a morning talk show, tearing up, as she described, the inspiration for a character that was a direct reflection of my own heartbreak after a painful breakup. The interviewer lauded her bravery and vulnerability. I was sitting on my worn-out sofa, eating toast, feeling my own story being sold back to me in a package I couldn't even claim. It was the Hawthorne Family Foundation for Young Artists, a charity my mother established, funded almost entirely by the book royalties, which were funneled through a series of accounts I had set up to be anonymous. My mother would stand at galas and speak about the importance of nurturing new voices, while the original voice was sitting 100 miles away, starting the next chapter. They called me the sensitive one, the hermit. My solitude was framed as an artistic quirk that enabled Amelia's success. Clara needs her peace and quiet to work her magic, my mother would tell people, making me sound like some mystical creature instead of a person. The truth was, I wasn't allowed to be anything else. I wasn't allowed to have a public life because it would raise questions. I wasn't encouraged to date because it might distract me from my production schedule. My life was a cage gilded with the profits of my own erasure. But I kept writing, because it was the only thing I had, the only thing that felt real. The stories were mine, even if the name on the cover wasn't. The breaking point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. I had been working on something for myself, a new story, different from the Hawthorne brand. It was darker, more complex, and it was mine. I told myself it was just for me, a secret garden no one else could enter. Then, 2 months ago, Amelia's agent secured a massive deal, a 2-book contract with a 7-figure advance and a guaranteed film option for the first book. It was the kind of career-defining moment they had been working toward for years. The only catch? The publisher needed the first manuscript in 3 months. An impossible deadline. Amelia called me, ecstatic. She didn't ask. She told. "We need the new book by August, Clara. Can you believe it? This is it." I hesitated. For the first time in 15 years, I said, "I don't know, Amelia. That's really fast. I'm a little burned out." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and cold. "Burned out?" she repeated, the words dripping with disbelief and contempt. "Clara, this is our future. This is the movie deal. What could you possibly be burned out from? You sit in a cottage and write all day. I'm the one doing the work, the tours, the interviews, the smiling. Don't be so selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the air between us. I had written 10 best-selling novels for her. I had sacrificed my identity, my youth, my own stories. And when I finally whispered that I was tired, I was called selfish. I told her I couldn't promise that deadline. I needed a break. She didn't argue. She just said, "I'm telling Mom," and hung up. 2 hours later, the email from my mother arrived. "You have broken this family's heart." It wasn't an olive branch. It was a verdict. I was no longer a person to them. I was a broken appliance, a malfunctioning asset that was failing to produce. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It hardened. The part of me that had been waiting for their permission, their approval, their love, it just went silent. I realized they didn't love me. They loved what I could do for them, and I had just stopped doing it. So I opened that new email, attached the manuscript that was truly mine, the one I had been writing in secret, and I sent it to an agent in California, a man who had never heard the name Hawthorne. His name was Ben Carter. I just wrote, "My name is Clara. I wrote this book. I think you'll like it." Then I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in a decade. The initial fallout was subtle, a quiet tremor before the earthquake. Amelia, I assume, told their agent and publisher that the manuscript was coming along, buying time, probably believing I would cave. My mother likely started her campaign of emotional warfare, expecting me to crumble under the weight of her disappointment. They didn't know I had already made my move. Ben Carter, the agent in California, responded within 24 hours. His email was one word: extraordinary. He called me an hour later. His voice was electric with excitement. He asked if I had a representative. I said no. He asked if I'd written anything else. I laughed and said, "Yes, you've probably read it." That was the first domino. While my family was strategizing how to guilt me back into my cage, I was on the phone with Ben, explaining the entire 15-year charade. He was silent for a long time, and I thought I'd scared him off. Then he just said, "Okay, so what do you want to do now?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question in my adult life. What did I want? The answer was immediate and clear. "I want my name back," I said. "I want my stories back." My first action was precise and silent. I went online to the state's corporate registry. The Hawthorne Family Foundation for Young Artists was, on paper, a legitimate nonprofit. But its largest and most consistent donor was a private investment fund registered in Delaware. A fund I had created years ago, into which a significant portion of the book royalties were diverted before they ever reached the family's primary accounts. It was my secret safety net. But it was also the lifeblood of my mother's public persona as a grand philanthropist. With a few clicks and a digital signature, I filed the paperwork to dissolve the fund and liquidate its assets directly to a new account under my name only. The process would be completed within 5 business days. There would be no warning. The next morning, I drove into town and met with an intellectual property lawyer Ben had recommended. I brought with me the digital files for every manuscript I had ever written. They were all on an old hard drive, complete with time-stamped drafts, notes, and metadata that would create a clear, undeniable timeline of creation. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies, looked through the evidence with a grim fascination. "They never even asked you to sign a work-for-hire agreement?" she asked, incredulous. "No," I replied. "It was a family arrangement." She almost smiled. "Family arrangements don't hold up in copyright court," she said. "Technically, Miss Hawthorne, you are the sole legal author of every single one of those books. Your sister has been committing a rather spectacular act of fraud." We filed the copyrights for all 10 previous novels under my legal name, Clara Wallace, the name I was born with. While this was happening, the pressure from my family began to mount. Amelia sent a string of texts, oscillating between rage and feigned concern. "Are you sick? Just talk to me, Clara. We can fix this. You're being incredibly childish. You're going to destroy everything we've built." That phrase again. We've built. My mother took a different approach. She sent a beautiful bouquet of my favorite flowers, peonies with a card that read, "We are all worried about you. Please come home." Home. She meant her house, not my cottage. She meant come back to my station, back to my role. I didn't respond to any of it. I let the flowers wilt on my doorstep. I blocked Amelia's number. Instead, I focused on the next step. The cottage I lived in, and the land it sat on, was part of the larger family estate, legally owned by a trust my mother controlled. I paid no rent, another part of our arrangement. They saw it as their generous provision for me. I saw it as the place where I worked. I packed 3 suitcases, my computer, and my hard drives. I found a small, furnished apartment for rent in a town 30 miles away under my own name, and paid the deposit and first month's rent with my own money. The night before I left, I walked through the empty cottage. It didn't feel like home. It felt like an office I was finally quitting. I left the key on the kitchen counter, next to the wilted peonies I'd finally brought inside, and drove away without looking back. It was only after I left that they realized I hadn't just stopped writing their future. I was about to reclaim their past. The first real scream of panic came a week after I left. It was a frantic email from Amelia to our old shared email address, the one we used for business. The subject line was, "Urgent. Publisher." I opened it out of a detached sense of curiosity. It seemed her editor had called. The film studio was getting anxious and wanted to see a draft, any draft, of the new novel. The publisher was threatening to invoke a penalty clause in her contract if a manuscript wasn't delivered. The 7-figure advance they had already received a portion of would have to be returned. "Clara, they're going to sue me," she wrote. "This is my career, my life. You have to send me what you have. Even if it's just a rough draft, just send it. We can talk about your break after this is over." The entitlement was breathtaking. She still saw my work as her property, my mind as a resource she was entitled to. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the email to my lawyer, Ms. Davies, with a simple note. For the file. The real explosion happened 2 days later. The dissolution of the Delaware Fund was finalized. On a Tuesday morning, my mother, Eleanor, was scheduled to present a keynote speech at a major philanthropic luncheon. Her speech was about the Foundation's new initiative to build a state-of-the-art writing center. She stood at the podium, in front of hundreds of the state's most influential people, and announced a cornerstone pledge of $2 million from her foundation's primary benefactor. As she was speaking, her financial director was in his office, watching in horror as the foundation's accounts went from a healthy 7 figures to just under $50,000. The wire transfer he was expecting had not arrived. Instead, he got a notification from the bank that the originating fund had been closed. My cousin, who worked for the catering company at the event, texted me later that day. She said Eleanor had turned pale mid-speech, stammered through her closing remarks, and practically ran off the stage. The director met her in the wings, his face ashen. The whispers started immediately. By the evening, the city's society blogs were buzzing. "Hawthorne Foundation pledges millions, but do they have it?" one headline read. My mother's carefully constructed image as a benevolent arts patron had cracked right down the middle. That evening, my mother called me. Not from her phone, but from her lawyer's. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was stern and official. "Clara, this is John Ellison. On behalf of your mother, Eleanor Hawthorne, there has been a catastrophic financial event concerning the foundation. We have reason to believe you are involved. You need to contact me immediately to discuss the reversal of these actions before we are forced to pursue legal remedies. Legal remedies? They were threatening to sue me for taking back my own money earned from books I wrote. The irony was so bitter, it was almost funny. This was when they started to understand that I wasn't having a tantrum. This was a demolition. They just didn't realize that they were the ones who had handed me the detonators years ago. They thought the power was in the name on the book cover. They never understood that the real power was in the quiet, methodical work they had taken for granted for so long. They had built their entire world on my silence, and I had finally decided to speak, and my first words were setting their world on fire. The past is never really past, is it? It's a foundation. You either build on it, or it crumbles beneath you. My family thought our shared history was their fortress, but it was actually my evidence. The flashback that explains everything isn't one single moment, but the collection of 1,000 tiny surrenders. It began with that first short story, but it was cemented a year later. I had written my first full novel, a raw, sprawling story about two sisters navigating a family tragedy. It was my heart on 300 pages. Amelia read it and was mesmerized. My mother read it and saw dollar signs. She was the one who found the agent, a friend of a friend. She was the one who coached Amelia on how to talk about the book, how to adopt my memories and my emotions as her own. I remember the first meeting with the publisher. I wasn't there. I was told to stay home. "It will just confuse things, Clara," my mother had said, straightening Amelia's jacket. "You know you don't like these kinds of meetings. Let Amelia handle it." I sat in my room and tracked the flight to New York online, feeling like a ghost watching my own life from a distance. The book was a breakout success. The reviews praised its startling authenticity. Amelia was on television, being interviewed by a woman who asked her, "The relationship between the sisters in the book feels so real, so lived in. Where did that come from?" And Amelia, without missing a beat, smiled her beautiful sad smile and said, "It came from a place of deep personal truth. My sister and I, we have a very complex bond." She was using our real bond to sell a fictional one, a lie that was devouring the truth. Over the years, the system became brutally efficient. I would write. I would finish a manuscript and email it to a private address that only Amelia and my mother could access. They would read it. My mother would give notes, which were usually about making the story more commercial, more on brand for Amelia Hawthorne. Then Amelia would do a pass, which involved changing a few words here and there, just enough so she could tell herself she had contributed. She was the face. I was the factory. Their dependency on me wasn't just creative, it became total. They never learned how the publishing industry actually worked beyond the cocktail parties and award ceremonies. I was the one who corresponded with the editor under a pseudonym, Catherine, Amelia's assistant, to handle structural edits and copy edits, because Amelia didn't have the patience or the knowledge. I was the one who managed the financial architecture that shielded most of the income from taxes and supported their lifestyle. They just saw the money appear in their accounts. They thought it was magic. It was just my meticulous, thankless work. This wasn't a secret kept from me. It was a role assigned to me. Every time I expressed a flicker of desire for something more, to take a class, to travel, to have my name on even a small story in an obscure journal. It was met with the same gentle, suffocating response from my mother. "But darling, why would you want to do that? You have the perfect setup. You don't have to deal with the pressure, the critics, the ugly side of fame. We protect you from all that, so you can be free to create." They framed my prison as a sanctuary. They called my erasure a gift. The cruelest part was how they used my own stories against me. If I wrote a character who was lonely, they would say, "Oh, Clara is in one of her melancholic moods. It's good for the book." If I wrote a character who was angry and defiant, they would get nervous. "This new heroine is a bit harsh, isn't she? Not very likable. Readers connect with Amelia's warmth," my mother would say. They were not only stealing my work, they were curating my soul, sanding down any parts of my personality that didn't fit the brand. This history, this long, slow erosion of self, was why my reaction was so total. It wasn't about one fight over one deadline. It was about reclaiming a life that had been co-opted, a voice that had been silenced, and a name that had been stolen. They didn't just take my stories, they tried to take my soul. And I was finally taking it back. The confrontation, when it finally came, wasn't a dramatic shouting match in a rain-swept mansion. It happened in the beige, sterile conference room of my lawyer's office. A week after the Foundation's implosion, I received a formal request for a mediation meeting. My mother, Amelia, and their lawyer, John Ellison, on one side of the polished mahogany table. Me and Miss Davies on the other. It was the first time I had seen them in person since I'd left. Amelia looked pale and furious, her celebrity glow replaced by a tight, pinched anxiety. My mother, however, was a masterclass in controlled composure. She was dressed in an elegant dark gray suit, her expression one of deep, sorrowful concern, as if she were visiting a sick relative. It was a performance, and it was for my benefit. Their lawyer started, his tone conciliatory. "Clara, we're all here because we believe there's been a profound misunderstanding. Wires have been crossed. Feelings have been hurt. But we are, at the end of the day, a family, and your mother and sister want to find a way forward." I didn't say anything. I just looked at Miss Davies, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. My mother leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Darling," she began, her voice soft and heavy with practiced emotion. "We know you're upset. You felt overworked. We understand that. We should have listened. But what you've done, shutting down the Foundation's funding, threatening Amelia's contract, this isn't the way. This is destructive." "The Foundation's funding was my money," I said. My voice was even, steady. It didn't sound like my own. It sounded stronger. "Money I earned," Amelia finally snapped. "Oh, your money?" She spat, her voice sharp. "The money you only have because of me? Because I was the one out there selling those books? I was the one building the brand, shaking hands, doing the goddamn talk shows while you were hiding in your cottage? You would be nothing without me." "You're right," I said, and a flicker of triumph crossed her face before I continued. "I would be nothing. I would be Clara Wallace, a moderately successful author. Instead, I was the silent partner in the Amelia Hawthorne empire. But the thing about silent partners is, the partnership can be dissolved." "This is not a business," my mother interjected, her voice rising for the first time. "This is a family. We had an agreement." "I know," I said, "and I am ending it. I am the legal copyright holder of all 10 Amelia Hawthorne novels. I am the creator of the intellectual property that this family's entire fortune is built on. And I am taking it back." Ms. Davies slid a folder across the table. "These are the copyright registration certificates, filed last week," she said calmly. "And this," she added, sliding a second folder over, "is a cease and desist letter. It demands that your client, Amelia Hawthorne, immediately stop representing herself as the author of these works. It also informs her publisher of the true authorship. We expect a public retraction and a full accounting of all royalties and advances to be delivered to my client within 30 days. Amelia's face went white. She looked at the folders as if they were venomous snakes. My mother stared at me, her mask of sorrow finally dropping, revealing the cold, hard fury beneath. "You would do that?" she whispered. "You would destroy your own sister? You would destroy this family, all for a little bit of credit?" And there it was, the core of it all. To them, my name, my identity, my life's work was just a little bit of credit. "You destroyed her first, Elena," I said, using her first name for the first time. "You did it the day you decided one daughter's face was worth more than the other's soul. I'm not destroying anything. I'm correcting the record." I stood up. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't cried. I had simply stated the facts. "The discussion is over," I said, looking not at them but at their lawyer. "You can communicate with Miss Davies from now on." As I walked out of the room, Amelia's voice followed me, cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. "Clara, wait. What about the new book? The movie deal? What am I supposed to do?" I stopped at the door, but didn't turn around. "I don't know, Amelia," I said, and the words felt like liberation. "Maybe you could try writing it yourself." The aftermath was not a swift, clean execution. It was a slow, messy, public unraveling. Miss Davies sent the cease and desist letter, and the publishing world, which thrives on gossip, exploded. The story was too juicy to ignore. Amelia Hawthorne, the literary darling, was a fraud, and her reclusive unknown sister was the true genius. It started as a blind item on a publishing blog. Then it grew into a full-blown investigation by a major newspaper. Amelia's publisher immediately put her contract on hold and launched an internal review. The film studio pulled out of the option deal, citing creative uncertainties. The carefully constructed facade of the Hawthorne empire crumbled like a sandcastle in a tsunami. Reporters started camping out near my mother's estate, and even found my new, modest apartment building. I didn't speak to any of them. I let the legal documents do the talking. Ben Carter, my new agent, was brilliant. He shielded me from the worst of the media storm while strategically positioning my own book. He framed it perfectly. This wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of artistic reclamation. He sent the manuscript for The Shadow's Daughter, my secret book, my real book, to a handful of top editors. A bidding war started within 48 hours. I ended up signing with a different publisher, a rival house, for a deal that dwarfed anything Amelia Hawthorne had ever received. The irony was exquisite. The consequences for them were devastating and specific. Amelia became a pariah. Her social media was flooded with vitriol. Friends stopped returning her calls. The brand she had so carefully cultivated was now toxic. I saw a paparazzi photo of her online, looking haggard and thin, a shadow of the radiant celebrity she had been. There was no pity in me, only a strange, hollow emptiness. My mother's downfall was quieter but more profound. The Hawthorne Foundation officially folded. The society columns that once celebrated her were now dissecting her role in the deception. She was no longer a respected philanthropist. She was a manipulative mother who had exploited one child for the benefit of another. She retreated into the family home, a fortress that had now become her prison. They tried to fight back, of course. Their lawyer made threats of a countersuit, claiming I had violated a verbal contract and had unjustly enriched myself. Ms. Davies laughed when she told me. "They have nothing," she said. "No paper trail, no legal standing. All they have is a history of exploitation, and every email they ever sent you is another nail in their coffin." They soon went silent. My life, in contrast, became very real. I did my first ever interview, a print-only piece with a respected literary journal. I was terrified, but I spoke my truth. I talked about the words, the stories, where they came from. I didn't mention my sister or my mother by name. I didn't have to. The journalist asked me what it felt like to finally be stepping into the light. I told her it didn't feel like stepping into the light. It felt like coming home to myself. The book's release was still months away, but an excerpt was published, and the early reviews were euphoric. They praised the new, raw power in the writing, the unflinching honesty. It was my work, my voice, under my name. Every word of praise was a balm on a 15-year-old wound. But the story isn't over. They lost their empire. I gained my name. But the space between us, the wreckage of what we once called a family, remains. And I know, with a certainty that chills me, that they are not the kind of people to simply fade away. The silence from them now is not an admission of defeat. It's the quiet before a different kind of storm. The lesson in all of this isn't about revenge. If this were about revenge, I would have reveled in their downfall. I would have enjoyed the scathing articles and the public humiliation. But I didn't. Watching their world burn gave me no pleasure. It only felt like a sad, inevitable chemical reaction. They had built a house with gasoline, and was shocked when I finally struck a match. The real lesson is about ownership. Not ownership of money or property, but ownership of your own story. For 15 years, I let them be the authors of my life. They decided who I was, what I was worth, and what my purpose was. My silence was my consent. I thought I was being loyal, dutiful, loving. But what I was actually being was complicit in my own erasure. The greatest lie they ever told me wasn't that Amelia wrote the books. It was that my voice was only valuable if it came out of someone else's mouth. I learned that your identity is not a gift someone else bestows upon you. It's something you must claim and then defend, sometimes fiercely. It's in the small choices, signing your own name, speaking your own truth, saying no, even when your voice shakes. The world will always try to write you into a role that serves its own narrative. It's your job, your sacred duty to yourself, to pick up the pen and write your own. I also learned about the true nature of strength. I always thought Amelia was the strong one, with her confidence and her charisma. I thought my mother was strong, with her iron will, and her strategic mind. I saw myself as weak, quiet, pliable. I was wrong. True strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about the quiet, unyielding integrity of your own soul. It's the ability to withstand pressure, to hold on to your truth when everyone around you is trying to tear it away. It's the courage to be the sole architect of your own life, even if it means tearing down the comfortable, familiar house you grew up in. The cost of this lesson was a family. I don't know if that's a wound that will ever heal. Maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe some relationships are not meant to be salvaged, but to be survived. What I gained was myself. I can now walk into a bookstore and know that one day, my name, Clara Wallace, will be on a spine. My picture will be on the jacket. The story inside will be mine, from the first word to the last. And that feeling, that quiet, solid sense of self, it's worth more than any empire. It's the kind of wealth they can never touch. It's the legacy I was actually meant to build. My story isn't over, and neither is yours. We all have moments where we feel our voices are being drowned out, where we're made to feel small or invisible for the convenience of others. It might not be as dramatic as a literary conspiracy, but the feeling is the same. That smallness, that silence, it's a heavy burden to carry. So, I want to ask you, have you ever had to fight to reclaim your own story? Have you ever felt like a ghost in your own life? And what did you do to finally be seen? Share your story in the comments below. Reading them, sharing them, it's a way of turning the lights on for each other, of reminding ourselves that our voices matter, especially our own. Your story is your power. Don't ever let anyone else hold the pen. Thank you for listening.